At this very moment, as you hear these words, billions of people around the planet are experiencing something that has never happened before in human history. They no longer know who they are. They don't know what their place is in the world. They don't know what to believe in. They don't know where they're going. And most terrifying of all, they don't know if any of this matters. For the first time since we descended from the trees in the African savannas, our species has completely lost its way. We haven't just lost some references or traditions, as happened in other periods of transition. We've lost the very ability to create a reliable map of reality. It's as if all of humanity had awakened in an infinite labyrinth where the walls constantly move, where maps rewrite themselves as we try to read them, and where the only certainty is that the rules we learned yesterday will be useless tomorrow. If you feel lost, if you feel that the world no longer makes sense, if you feel that all the narratives that used to give meaning to human life have become suspicious or obsolete, you're not imagining things. You're clearly perceiving an existential crisis that is simultaneously the greatest threat and the greatest opportunity our species has ever faced. For tens of thousands of years, human beings developed sophisticated mechanisms for dealing with uncertainty and finding meaning in a universe that fundamentally doesn't offer ready-made answers to our deepest questions. We created religions to explain our origin and destiny. We built cultures to define our values and behaviors. We established traditions to transmit wisdom across generations. We developed rituals to mark the important passages of life. All these structures functioned as existential compasses, cognitive tools that allowed us to navigate the complexity of human experience without succumbing to the mental chaos that the complete absence of direction inevitably produces. A young person in ancient Athens knew they should seek excellence through virtue. A medieval peasant knew they should serve God and their feudal lord. A worker in the Industrial Revolution knew they should work hard to improve their family's condition. Even in times of great social transformation, there were always sufficiently stable reference points for people to build coherent identities and life projects with some sense of continuity. But something fundamentally different began to happen in the last decades of the 20th century and intensified dramatically in the 2022. The transformations we are experiencing are not just traditional social, economic, or technological changes. They are changes in the very nature of human reality. Artificial intelligence is not just a new tool like the wheel or the steam engine were. It represents a fundamental alteration in the relationship between mind and matter, between what is human and what is artificial, between what is real and what is simulated. Social networks are not just new means of communication like the telephone or radio were. They created a new dimension of human existence where billions of people simultaneously live in multiple parallel realities, each with its own rules, values, and versions of facts. Globalization is not just an expansion of international trade, as happened in other historical periods. It created a systemic interdependence so complex that small perturbations in any part of the world can generate unpredictable consequences in all other parts. transforming the entire planet into a giant nervous organism where each neuron can affect all other neurons instantly. In this new context, the ancient tools for finding meaning and direction have not just become inadequate, they have become counterproductive. Trying to apply the logic of earlier eras to contemporary challenges is like trying to use a map of medieval Europe to navigate on Mars. It doesn't just not work. It actively confuses us and makes us waste even more time in conceptual dead ends. Traditional religions offer answers to questions that many people can no longer even formulate in a relevant way. Political ideologies from the 19th and 20th centuries try to solve problems that no longer exist. Ignoring fundamentally new questions they can't even name adequately. Educational models prepare young people for careers that probably won't exist when they graduate, teaching skills that machines already master better than any human being ever will. Economic systems operate according to premises about scarcity and competition that may have made sense when our ancestors competed for limited resources in the African savanna, but which have become not just obsolete, but dangerous in an era where our capacity to produce material resources has far exceeded our capacity to distribute them in a way that makes sense, or our capacity to understand what kind of life is worth living when basic survival needs have already been largely resolved. This disconnection between our cognitive systems and our current reality creates a form of psychological suffering that is qualitatively different from anything previous generations experienced. It's not the anxiety of someone who has specific problems to solve, because most of our basic practical problems have already been solved by technology and material abundance. It's not the sadness of someone who lost something valuable, because many of us don't even know exactly what we lost or if we really lost anything at all. It's not fear of concrete dangers, because most of our physical security is greater than that of any previous generation. It's a more fundamental type of existential anguish, the feeling that our entire experience of being alive has somehow become unreal, as if we were playing a role in a theater play whose script nobody can find, on a stage whose dimensions constantly change, for an audience that may not even exist. Yuval Noah Harari calls this phenomenon a crisis of meaning. But I believe we need an even more precise term. What we are facing is a crisis of ontological orientation. We no longer know not just how we should live, but what it means to be alive in the first place. We no longer know not just what values we should follow, but whether the very notion of value makes any sense in a universe where algorithms can simulate any value system with perfection indistinguishable from the real thing. We no longer know not just what our purpose is, but whether the search for purpose isn't just an obsolete evolutionary remnant of brains that evolved to find patterns and meanings even where they don't exist, a kind of persistent cognitive illusion that prevents us from accepting that perhaps there is no deeper purpose to be discovered. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly. When was the last time you felt genuinely certain about something important? When was the last time you made a significant decision without a voice in your head whispering that maybe you're completely wrong about everything? I know it can be difficult to admit, even to yourself, But many of us live in a constant state of doubt about our own choices and beliefs. It's not that we doubt this or that specific opinion, but rather that we doubt the very possibility of having solid opinions about anything. If this feeling resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "I feel this fundamental uncertainty when," and filling in with your personal experience. Your honesty might be exactly what another person needs to read today to realize they're not alone in this difficult navigation through a world that seems to have lost its coordinates. But here's the twist that Harari suggests, and which can completely transform our perspective on this apparently desperate crisis. What if this feeling of being lost is not a problem to be solved, but rather a necessary stage in a deeper evolutionary transformation? What if our current inability to find meaning in old narratives is not our failure, but rather evidence that we're finally growing beyond our childish need for false certainties and ready-made meanings? What if this disorientation is not the symptom of a sick civilization, but rather the birth pangs of a completely new form of human consciousness? Consider the radical possibility that our species is going through a cognitive metamorphosis, similar to what a caterpillar experiences when it transforms into a butterfly. During the pupa phase, the caterpillar literally dissolves. Its body structures break down into an amorphous organic soup. If you could ask the caterpillar's cells what's happening during this process, they would probably say that everything is terrible, that they're losing everything that defined them, that they no longer know who they are or where they're going. But this dissolution is not the end of the caterpillar. It's the necessary condition for the birth of something qualitatively different and in many ways superior. A creature capable of flying, of seeing the world from perspectives impossible for a caterpillar, of experiencing forms of freedom that couldn't even be imagined in the previous stage. Our civilization may be going through a similar process. The ancient structures of meaning are not simply being destroyed by malevolent external forces. They are dissolving because they are no longer adequate for the type of consciousness we are becoming. A human being equipped with instant access to all information ever produced by the species, capable of communicating in real time with anyone on the planet, living in a world where machines can perform most basic cognitive tasks better than any person, can no longer find existential satisfaction in the same things that satisfied our ancestors. Not because something is wrong with us, but because we have evolved beyond those previous stages of development. This doesn't mean we should completely reject everything that came before, but it means we need to learn to relate to our traditions in a completely new way, not as absolute truths to be followed blindly, but as useful tools for certain specific situations, as partial perspectives that can offer us valuable insights without imprisoning us in limited worldviews. It's like the difference between an adult who still literally believes in Santa Claus and an adult who can appreciate the beauty and utility of the Santa Claus narrative without confusing the metaphor with physical reality. Artificial intelligence, ironically, may be forcing us to finally discover what makes human intelligence truly special. When machines can process information, recognize patterns, and even simulate creativity better than us, we are forced to look for deeper and more subtle human capabilities. Perhaps our true evolutionary advantage is not in our ability to solve logical problems or memorize information, but rather in our unique capacity to experience subjective meaning, to create beauty for the simple pleasure of creating, to love without practical reasons, to ask questions that don't have objective answers, but which are still worth asking. Social networks, despite all their obvious problems, may also be teaching us something fundamental about the fluid and constructed nature of human identity. When we can experiment with different versions of ourselves online, when we can connect with communities based on specific interests instead of just geographical proximity, when we can explore aspects of our personality that perhaps never had space to emerge in the more rigid social structures of the past, we discover that identity is not something fixed that we possess, but rather something dynamic that we continuously create. This can be scary for those who were taught to believe they should have a stable and consistent true self. But it can be liberating for those who learn to see identity and fluidity not as confusion, but as creative flexibility. Globalization, with all its complexity and interdependence, may be forcing us to develop a type of planetary consciousness that transcends the tribal limits that defined human experience for most of our history. When events on the other side of the world directly affect our daily life, when problems like climate change or pandemics can only be solved through global cooperation, when our economy depends on supply chains that connect hundreds of countries, we are forced to expand our capacity for empathy and our understanding of responsibility beyond the narrow circles of family, tribe, or nation. This can be overwhelming for brains that evolved to worry mainly about small and stable groups. But it may be preparing us to truly become a conscious planetary species. What Harari offers us is not a simple solution to our collective sense of being lost, but rather a radical shift in perspective about what it means to be lost in the first place. Instead of seeing our current disorientation as evidence that something terrible is happening to us, we can begin to see it as evidence that something extraordinary is happening through us. Instead of trying desperately to return to a past that offered more certainty, we can learn to navigate a present that offers more possibility. Instead of looking for new absolute belief systems to replace the old ones, we can develop the capacity to live creatively and compassionately amid fundamental uncertainty. This requires a completely new type of courage, not a heroic courage to fight against external enemies, but the contemplative courage to face the truth that we may never find definitive answers to our deepest questions, and that perhaps this is not a problem, but rather the natural condition of a consciousness sophisticated enough to ask interesting questions. It's the courage to find beauty in the search itself, meaning in the very process of questioning, purpose in the very capacity to imagine different possibilities for what human life can become. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the philosophical challenges of our time. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we are witnessing. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth. Join us in this continuous journey. Subscribe so we can continue this essential conversation about how to live with more wisdom and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented and divided. Harari's response to those who feel lost in 2026 is not a detailed map that tells us exactly where to go. It's something much more valuable. The understanding that being lost can be paradoxically exactly where we need to be to discover who we really are and who we can become. Our current disorientation is not the end of the human story. It's the beginning of a completely new chapter, one we don't yet know how to write, but which we have the extraordinary privilege of helping to create. And perhaps, in the end, the only direction that really matters is the willingness to keep walking with curiosity and compassion, even when we don't know where the path leads.
A lot of people, if they're watching this video, it was recommended to them by an algorithm.
Algorithms now are extremely powerful. They increasingly control us. I'm now publishing a book. I'm on a book tour. My number one client is not a human being, it's the algorithm. If I can get the algorithm to recommend my book, that's it. My job is done. The humans will follow the algorithm. We need these algorithms, otherwise we can't manage this huge information network without algorithmic help. They should be accountable. If a social media algorithm recommends to people a hate-filled conspiracy theory, this is the fault not of the person who produced the conspiracy theory. It's the fault of the people who designed and let loose the algorithm. There is this huge debate about freedom of speech. I think we should be extremely careful about censoring the free speech of human beings, but they should be held accountable for the decisions of their algorithms. And algorithms don't have freedom of speech. It's the first time in history that there is something which is not a human being that decides which stories to spread and that can create new stories.
Please welcome Yuval Noah Harari and Sir Stephen Fry.
Goodness me, I wasn't sure anyone would turn up. Isn't this rather exciting? Well, it's a great thrill for me to be with this hero of mine, really, Yuval Noah Harari. I'm sure many of you will have read the book that catapulted his name into world fame, Sapiens, a remarkable history of our species, which involved many, many extraordinary insights and a kind of thrilling narrative of its own. But one of the things, Yuval, that I think many of us were impressed by was the way you showed that perhaps Sapiens was almost the wrong title. It wasn't that we were the wise humanity, but that we were storytelling humanity. That what separated us from the Neanderthals and from other primates and set us on our course was the fact that we told stories about ourselves and about the world as we apprehended it. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And would you say that this is both what gets us into trouble, because a story is also another word for a lie, and also what propels us into a stable future?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword in this regard, which becomes particularly important in the age of AI, because for the first time in history, we encounter a better storyteller than we are. We took over the planet not because we are more intelligent than the other animals, but because we can cooperate better. And we cooperate through storytelling. And you have the obvious examples like religions, but my favorite example is money, which is probably the greatest story ever invented, ever told, because it's the only one everybody believes, or almost everybody. I mean, humans. No other animal on the planet knows that money even exists, because it only exists in our imagination. But now there is another thing on the planet that knows that money exists, and that can maybe invent new kinds of money and new kinds of other stories. And what will happen to us when we have to deal, it's not just with one better storyteller, but with billions of better storytellers than us on this planet. That's, I think, one of the biggest questions of our age.
Yes, and you're talking, of course, about AI, and it's